Hey guys, and welcome to a showdown between two old school rivals, the mighty Dawi, led by Grombrindel, up against some pesky pointy-eared elflins, this time the Dark Elves, led by the legendary warrior Kafka of the RTK clan. We're here on Warpstone Mine. Perhaps it used to be a good old dwarvish mine, but no longer, as the mighty Skaven have of course intervened, but these two foes are once again up against each other. Now this build may seem slightly familiar to you guys who have seen my tutorial guide on a few basic tactics. This was the build I used to represent the Dawi Onion build, and it is arguably the best and most effective way of playing the Dwarfs. So let's go for a little run through here. In the front line, we do have the mighty Dwarf Warriors. These guys incredibly cheap, but quite happy to be here. They're here to settle some scores and grudges and make the Longbeards proud of them. In the secondary line, we do have a ton of Rangers. These guys, again, relatively cheap troops, but there's a huge amount of them, and over the course of a battle, could do some pretty good consistent fire, especially up against the Dark Elves who are relatively squishy themselves. In the third battle line, we have Miners, one of which is the Ekrund Miners, Regiment of Renown, and then we have another rank of Thunderers, and then another rank of Dwarf Warriors with great weapons this time, better at charging into the enemy, and then we have a couple of units of Slayers in the back line. So as you can see, there is so many layers to this build. It is going to be an absolute nightmare to crack through and feast upon those troops such as the Thunderers that the Dark Elves are going to have to shut down. Because if units like Thunderers and Rangers can fire for the entirety of a battle, you know you're in big trouble. To lead the forces here, we do have a legendary Rune Lord coming in with the Master Rune of Negation, that lovely 44% damage resistance, and Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Cool thing about runes now is they no longer have to be directly kind of cast on top of the Rune Lord. You can actually place them around the area in a relatively close circumference, but not too far away. Now, for the forces of the Dark Elves here, in the front lines, we have a mixture of bleak swords here just to hold the line and try to push their way into the enemy flanks where possible. But we also have some more elite troops in the form of the Hageneth Executioners, one on either flank. These bad-to-the-bones Dark Elf infantry not only carry their swords in a really cool fashion, kind of across their chests and over a shoulder, but they certainly know how to use it. They are anti-infantry, armor-piercing murderer machines. Very good units up against the Dwarfs if they can get into those key targets. Leading the force here, just on foot, is Malekith. Interesting to see him on foot rather than on his chariot. Chariots, of course, are notoriously good up against dwarfs, but I guess he'd be a bit of a hard target anyway for the dwarfs to catch, as he's a little bit slippery being an elf, coming in with a simple Soul Stealer. We do have double chariots as well. Cold One chariot, certainly an underrated chariot all round. You normally see the Scourge Runner chariots, but these heavy chariots can do pretty decent damage, of course, especially up against the dwarfs who do struggle with chariots. We have Sisters of Slaughter. It looks like we have some on either flank, so going incredibly wide here, and then a ton of harpies, 3 units in fact, up in the skies and looking to dive down onto the Dawi back line, while the front line gets to work in chewing its way through. Rangers do start unleashing a torrent of arrows onto the bleak swords here, and you can see they're actually taking relatively big damage considering they have silver shields, but that's due to the simple massive amount of bow fire coming in. Good play as well, good position by the Dwarfs, forcing the Dark Elves to clamber all the way up this hill to meet the Dwarf Warriors in hand to hand, and you can see the Dwarfs are not being idle here. One problem people often find with defensive builds is that they kind of stagnate and they're rather passive, but you can see the Dwarfs being really proactive, rearranging their forces to counter the enemy where possible, and committing troops in the reserve forces forward when they see threats and problems. Over on this right hand side you can see one unit of Dwarf Warriors is managed to pin in a ton of chariots, characters and units, although good micro here by the Dark Elves, forcing their troops through into the back line, plus a Soul Stealer coming on. Stuff is starting to look a little sketchy for the Dwarfs, but in come the Slayers, and Thunderer firepower is here to aid. Harpies do dart into the back line trying to shut down some Thunderers, but Slayers are afoot, should be able to do pretty effective stuff in cutting those Harpies down. There's a good portion of the Dwarf force as well, considering it was so wide, it's just simply impossible for the Dark Elves to shut down all of it. There's a nice big section here which is relatively calm and all good. They should be able to cleave their way through the Dark Elf left-hand flank. But it's all going on the right-hand side. Dark Elves committing everything to one side, which the flank overload can certainly work well against Onions if you can break the enemy force quick enough. But in this situation, you can see the Dwarfs have formed a central pocket here of ranged troops, a mixture of Rangers and Thunderers, protected by Rangers and Miners. They are doing huge damage to all these units trying to force their way in to the flank. Harpies have as well been forced off. So it looks like we have, yeah, Dwarfs trying to hold the left flank, Dwarfs trying to hold the right flank a little bit more successfully here, and the huge pocket of happy Dwarfs here. We have Thunderers and Rangers firing in both directions, dragging down the mighty Dark Elves. Sisters of Slaughter have now darted into the back lines, hunting down the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons and blasting charges, but they're pretty beat up at this point. Still have 60 models, so that damage output's going to be incredibly scary, but they are looking rather fragile at this point. Harpies do return, and they're going to be darting straight into those Thunderers to try and finish them off as quick as possible. One unit of Harganeth Executions are really struggling to break through these Dwarf Warriors, probably being held back by their own Bleak Swords, as a torrent of arrows do get unleashed over their heads, slowly picking apart the Dark Elf force there. Very close game so far. Those Harpies have managed to dart into the back line, and now the Cold One Chariots are just running riot here. Up to only 33 kills. We're doing some pretty decent damage and harassment. If they can bounce between these ranges as well, that'd be pretty perfect stuff. And the Dwarfs are now starting to crumble over here due to the simple weight of the Dark Elf attack. It looks like the elite forces have pushed through. The Harganeth Executions up to 65 kills. This is a Slaughter up to 40 here. Malekith is being slightly bogged down though by Slayers and Dwarf Warriors, not having the best time himself. But you can see the Dark Elves desperately trying to push through into that back line. The Rune Lord himself even chucking himself into hand-to-hand combat in an attempt to stem the tide. But Harganeth Executions are just going to kind of laugh at him and waddle on past, start chasing down these Thunderers here. Looks like some Harpies will get involved as well, and the Thunderers are starting to flee in all directions. Rangers being forced in hand-to-hand combat up against Sisters of Slaughter certainly isn't going to be fun, but some of their Ranger buddies are starting to do a bit of crossfire into the back of the Sisters of Slaughter, which is going to be really good because these ladies are basically naked. They have 5 armor, which is certainly not very good at all. Over on the left-hand side, looks like those Harganeth Executioners were able to eventually break through due to the help of some Cold One Chariots. But unfortunately for Cold One Chariots, like a lot of Cold One units in general, they do rampage, and they've rampaged straight into some Slayers, and that is going to be a real bad affair for the Dark Elves for sure. Sisters of Slaughter, despite the fact they were so low health, actually did manage to chew through the majority of these Dwarf Warriors and Miners, but are now finally going down, and Harpies are going to be used to clear up the back lines of routing Dwarf troops. Thunderers are going to be shooting in to try and protect their mighty Liege Lord here, who is surrounded by the Harganeth Executioners, looking to fulfill their role as Executioners and take the head off that Rune Lord. And it looks like he's in fact going to break, and his Thunder support is shut down by Harpies. Very scary stuff all round. Looks like Balanced Power was slightly Dwarf favoured a little while ago, but is now just a very tiny sliver in the favour of the forces of Dark Elves. Well, that could be largely due to the fact Malekith is pretty much full health, and the Rune Lord is done for. Thunderers are going to be being protected by Slayers here, and Slayers will tear apart Harpies relatively quickly. Harganeth Executioners will be another matter entirely, and the Thunderers are, going to have to retreat out of there, which is a good call. Over on the other flank, it looks like Harganeth Executioners are now struggling. Dwarf Warriors going to be pulling them apart, and the Rangers not even bothering to fire into them anymore, as they think they're done for. Only 14 models left, 141 kills, however, is pretty scary stuff, and the Dwarf Warriors are paying dearly with blood to try and drag down the Elite Warriors. Rangers have been used as combat troops, and they're pretty good at it in fairness. They have relatively decent armour at 40. Well, not good, but compared to a lot of ranged troops, it's not terrible. And okay melee defense, but they are rather cheap, so obviously going to get overrun by enemy combat troops. A load of Rangers, which fled the battlefield actually towards the Dark Elf battle lines, are now going to be able to come back and finish off those Sisters and return to the fold. It looks like the Rune Lord may be allowed to escape here as well. Will that come back to bite the Dark Elves? We'll have to wait and see. It's quite funny to watch Malekith running away from a load of bloody Dwarf Warriors. Definitely going to be seeking vengeance here. But with Stand Your Ground popped, they're really going to struggle to do any kind of decent, considerable damage to Malekith. Harpies do try to shut down the Rangers, although most of their ammunition has been used up at this point, and they're simply going to shatter the Harpies with Dwarven ferocity. And the other Harpies are dealt with as well. Slayers seeing to that. We have a decent amount of Thunderers returning to the fold. Miners probably want to intercept these Sisters of Slaughter, and just as I say that, they in fact do, charging in with their glorious pickaxes and clubbing these ladies to death. So the Dwarfs having a bit of a second wind here. Balanced Power is now crept back into the middle. They're kind of rallying on all flanks and actually forcing off the Dark Elf units on the fringes of the battlefield. Rune Lord is still running, not quite sure why. He has 46 leadership at this point, so he should probably come back to the fold. And it is going to be Malekith versus the world. Now, if this was Malekith on his chariot, maybe there would still be hope, but that is a lot of Thunder of Fire coming in. 21 and 23 models on those two units is enough armor piercing to certainly bring down Malekith if you can pin him in the right location. And that is going to be the job of these Dwarf Warriors. A job perhaps they do not want, but a job they have got themselves. Rune Lord has now rallied in the distance as well as more Rangers do come back. And yeah, it looks like it is basically Malekith against the world if we have a look around the battlefield. And he's not going to be having the best time. It says he has 24 troops, but most of those guys are just fleeing. He's having a whale of a time hunting down the Dwarf Warriors, but the Thunderers are a little bit of a bigger nuisance. Rangers will probably be dragged in as well, just to slow him down if he does indeed go after the Thunderers. There's also 34 Slayers here who are pretty decent melee combatants themselves, and unbreakable so they can pin in Malekith. This is some fantastic Dwarf play. Just slowly whittling units one after another. 5 Slayers here and there, just to, pin Malekith down, stop him from moving whilst we shoot him with everything, and then slowly sending in the next unit and the next and the next. And the Thunderers have relatively good ammunition left upon them as well, although it looks like a Soul Sealer may be coming down. Malekith will be getting healed up by that glorious witchcraft there. He has almost finished off the Slayers, one left fighting. Come back here. Come back, Malekith, you coward. He screams as he charges him with his double axes and clobbers him in the back a little bit as more Dwarf Warriors do pile in on top of him, trying to keep him at bay. This other unit of Slayers may want to get engaged as well. But Thunder is doing some glorious crossfire here. Malekith down to just 2,000 health. And it looks like Dwarf Warriors and Miners all going to be running in. Now, where is that Rune Lord? It looks like he is on his way back. Those runes coming down, Rune of Negation in particular, could be pretty key here. Now, Dwarfs are relatively slow, of course, due to their stature and their weight of armour. So they're going to struggle to escape Malekith, but with all these troops helping to bog him down, looks like the Thunderers will be able to escape relatively unscathed. And it looks like in comes a Mastered Rune of Negation. 44% damage resistance is huge, but can Malekith carry? He's done a pretty sturdy job so far, cutting his way through the Dwarven folk. With each swing, a severed head and beard does drop down to the ground. With so many Dwarf troops in combat, the Thunderers may actually struggle to hit him a little bit, but still, every shot which does connect with his pointy head, the fact he's actually so tall may be a bit of a detriment to him here. And it looks like he's even going to be getting hit as well by Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, just to add a bit more insult to injury. But a lot of the Dwarven forces starting to wave here. So many of them are desperately low on leadership because they're so beat up. The Rune Lord maybe standing a little bit closer would be able to encourage the troops. Paladin Executioners do try to rally here. There's only 10 of them, and these Rangers will be able to sort them off and force them off the field. And seeing his only allies fleeing, Malekith decides in a puff of smoke to disappear and retreat. So a Pyrrhic victory for the forces of the Dawi. A fantastic game here by both Grombrindle and Kafka. If you guys enjoyed, I hope you did, by the way, but if you did, feel free to give the video a big old thumbs up to let me know, and subscribe if you haven't already for more Total War Warhammer content. We have at least a video a day, sometimes 2 if you are indeed lucky. If you guys want to see your replays up on the channel, feel free to subscribe or to join my Discord, there's a link down below in the description. I do receive a lot of replays, so I can't guarantee it will appear, but keep on sending them in. I'm sure you'll get there eventually. Anyway, for the builds. Really good stuff by both of these players. Kafka's build was a little bit off meta, maybe. I mean, he still had chariots, but no Malekith on chariots. Mixing up a little bit, bringing some more elite troops is glorious stuff. And these guys did do very well for themselves as well. 145 and 103 kills. This unit not getting quite so much damage value, but still 145 kills and 10,000 damage dealt is scary stuff. The ones on the left-hand side were obviously fighting more elite troops. So despite the fact they did less damage dealt, they got some more damage value. Sisters of Slaughter are also pretty good in this matchup all round. They just tear through infantry very effectively, but they did also get whittled down a lot by the Dwarven Rangers. Good backline pressure throughout as well with the Harpies and the Cold One chariots, as well as Malekith himself who managed to push in, but unfortunately there just was not enough I suppose, Elvish pressure to shut down all of the Dwarven folk. And it's not a small Elvish build either. Let's see, there's 15 units in there all round, but a good old Dwarven 20 stack is a scary beast indeed. The Rune Lord, of course, isn't here to get any value from like combat himself. He's literally there to be one, cheap, so you can afford to have a big old 20 stack of dwarfs, but also the Master Rune of Negation is very powerful, and Rune of Wrath and Ruin is needed. You can slow down those chariots and allow the crossfire of Thunderers to do the dirty work. Overall, Miners did a decent job, as so did the Dwarf Warriors, of simply holding back the enemy and pinning them in place for as long as possible. Equally well for the Slayers, who performed pretty admirably themselves, also surrounding key targets to drag them down. But if we have a look across the Dwarven range, the Rangers are incredibly incredibly cheap unit. I believe they're 500 gold. I may be wrong there, but all of these guys making pretty decent damage value back on themselves, apart from just one unit. And the Thunderers themselves as well having a pretty, not quite a good time as the Rangers, but a few of them, making some good money, a few of them not quite. But they hit key targets, which the Rangers otherwise would not have been able to bring down. So really fun game all round. I think this is actually one of the best ways to play Dwarfs. All round is go incredibly wide and onion it up. And guys, what do you think? Let me know down below in the comments. Until next time, peace, peace. And as always, stay awesome.